Maya's fingers trembled as she clutched the boarding pass. The bustling terminal, the ringing of phones, and the distant chatter all seemed to blur around her as she stood in front of the gate. Her stomach twisted with a familiar knot, the kind she got before long flights. But it wasn't the flight she was afraid of. It was the reality of what had happened just moments earlier. She boarded the plane, found her seat in the first-class section, and settled in. The luxury of it, the comfort, the space. She'd worked hard for this, earned it, and yet, when the flight attendant arrived to check her ticket, her smile faltered as she looked at Maya, then the ticket, then back at Maya. "Excuse me, ma'am. You're in the wrong seat," she said. Her tone all business, with a glimmer of uncertainty in her eyes, was unmistakable. Confused, Maya glanced around. She was in her assigned seat. She held the ticket up, pointing to the number, but the attendant didn't seem to care. Instead, she glanced at the other passengers, a subtle nod to the older white man beside her. "You need to move, miss," the attendant insisted. "You can't sit here." The blood drained from Maya's face as she was silently escorted from the seat. She stood at the back of the cabin, humiliated, unsure of what had just transpired. The announcement blared over the PA system. "Attention passengers. This is your captain speaking. I regret to inform you that a mistake has been made regarding a seating arrangement. We are taking immediate action." And that's when the voice cut through the tension in the cabin. An unexpected twist, the kind Maya never saw coming. Maya's heart thumped against her chest as she stepped into the plane, her eyes scanning the first-class cabin she had worked so hard to deserve. The weight of her newly purchased ticket hung in the air like a victory, but as she took her seat, a strange sense of unease settled in. Her eyes flicked toward the flight attendant who had just passed her row, a brief moment of eye contact that felt like a warning. Maya could feel the unease stirring in the pit of her stomach, but she forced herself to breathe, to push the nagging doubt aside. She had earned this. She deserved this. But when the attendant came back, this time with an air of subtle authority, Maya's certainty faltered. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said, her voice polite but firm. "You're in the wrong seat." Maya blinked, confused. "No, this is my seat," she insisted, holding up the boarding pass as proof. The attendant didn't back down. She glanced briefly at the older white man seated next to her, then at Maya, then back at the boarding pass. Maya's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a mistake she thought it was. Without waiting for any explanation, the flight attendant asked her to move. Maya's stomach churned as she followed the request. Unsure of what was happening, why her rightful place had been taken from her, without a word of justification. As she moved to the back of the plane, her mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation for this sudden shift. But there was none, just the hum of the engines, the murmurs of the passengers, and a growing sense of disbelief that threatened to overwhelm her. She squeezed into the cramped seat at the back, her body stiff with anger and confusion. The weight of being out of place settled in her chest. She wasn't just displaced physically. She was made to feel invisible, unwelcome in a space that was meant to be hers. Maya clenched her fists in her lap, willing herself not to break. She wasn't going to be the quiet passenger in this story. Not this time. The soft hum of the plane did little to calm her nerves. It was all too familiar. The same discomfort, the same feeling of being unseen, of being treated as if she didn't belong in the spaces she fought so hard to be in. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. This was about something bigger, something that had been happening for far too long. As the plane took off, Maya's mind remained in turmoil. She wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. The world outside the airplane windows blurred as the engines roared to life, pushing the plane into the sky. Maya sat in her new seat, now wedged awkwardly in the middle of the coach, away from the luxurious first-class seat she had fought so hard to attain. Her mind was still reeling from what had just happened. How had things gone so wrong? She had held her ticket up so many times, repeating it like a mantra to the flight attendant. Her words a broken record. This is my seat. I'm supposed to be here. But it didn't matter. She'd been made to leave, ushered away, her rightful place on the plane taken by an older white man who had been seated in the section designated for her. The humiliation of it all gnawed at her insides like a sickness. Now, sitting at the back of the plane, with strangers around her giving looks She couldn't quite read. She tried to keep her composure. Her body ached, not from the cramped seat, but from the injustice. Maya couldn't focus on the flight anymore. The usual sound of planes taking off, the soothing hum of the engines, had turned into a painful reminder of her exclusion. Her skin itched with frustration, her fingers curling into tight fists as she tried to swallow the anger rising in her throat. But then, as the plane hit its cruising altitude, the calm, almost robotic voice of the captain echoed over the intercom, making Maya's pulse spike. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice said, "this is your captain speaking. I regret to inform you that a mistake has been made regarding the seating arrangement for one of our passengers. We are currently working to resolve the situation." Maya's stomach flipped. A mistake? That's how they were framing this? The whole plane was about to hear about it, and she was no longer sure which part of her body felt more exposed, the heat of her humiliation or the chill of disbelief. The murmurs spread across the cabin, barely audible but sharp. Heads turned, voices low, whispers floating through the air like smoke. Then, as if the captain's words were some sort of signal, another announcement cut through the tension. "Again, I apologize for confusion," the captain continued, his voice just a touch firmer now. "We're aware that this incident is uncomfortable. As I mentioned earlier, we are resolving it immediately. Please bear with us." Maya's hands clenched harder, her nails digging into the skin of her palm. There was no doubt anymore. This was no simple mistake. This was a deliberate act. They had seen her, assessed her, and decided she wasn't worthy of sitting where she belonged. Before she could process her feelings, a new voice came over the intercom, the tone so different from the captain's that it nearly stopped her heart. "This is your pilot speaking," the voice said. "I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. We've received many complaints, but I'm not asking for your patience anymore. No one should have to endure what one of our passengers just did." The statement hung in the air like a bomb, a strange silence settling in the cabin. A few confused gasps rippled through the rows, and Maya's chest tightened. Her eyes were glued to the overhead compartment in front of her, not daring to look around at the faces of her fellow passengers. That voice, the pilot's voice, was now more personal, more direct. Maya could almost hear his discomfort. He was acknowledging something big. Her stomach turned, a sensation that wasn't just nausea. It was a sting of recognition. He was speaking about her. She glanced up at the flight attendant who had escorted her out of first class. She was standing at the front of the cabin, her gaze fixed downward, her hands folding nervously in front of her. And then the pilot's voice broke the heavy silence again. "This issue will not be swept under the rug. We are committed to making this right." Maya blinked, stunned, her brain struggling to comprehend the weight of the words. Did he just? For a moment, the entire plane seemed to hold its breath. The unease and discomfort that had bubbled to the surface in the wake of Maya's treatment were now an undeniable presence. This wasn't just about her. It was about the truth of what she had endured, what she had been subjected to in public for all to see. It was now undeniable. Then the announcement ended abruptly. The hum of the engines resumed, but the damage had been done. People were talking now, nervous voices mingling in the air. But Maya didn't care about the passengers. She cared about what was happening now. She could no longer pretend that the mistake had been a one-off. It wasn't a fluke. This was the beginning of something much larger. She knew it. The captain knew it. The entire cabin knew it. And no matter how uncomfortable it made them, no one could go back to the way things were before. Maya sat still, the pounding in her chest deafening. The resolve she had kept so hidden before had now risen to the surface. She wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever. There was only one way forward, and she was ready for it. The plane was silent as the passengers awaited the next move, but Maya knew she had already taken hers. The wheels had been set in motion. The plane had reached a steady cruising altitude, but Maya's heart was still climbing, every beat pushing her to do something she hadn't quite planned for. Her mind raced as she clenched her fists, her fingernails digging into her palms. She couldn't sit quietly anymore, not after that announcement. The anger was starting to burn away her fear, replacing it with something sharper, more defined. She wasn't going to let this slide. As she stood up, The murmurs around her grew louder, more curious. She could feel their eyes on her, some sympathetic, others uncomfortable, and a few judgmental. The flight attendants, who had avoided making eye contact with her since she was moved to the back, stiffened as she walked toward the front of the cabin. "Ma'am, where are you going?" one of them called out, a nervous edge creeping into her voice. "I'm going to speak to the captain," Maya said, her voice clear but trembling with a mix of anger and purpose. The attendant glanced over her shoulder, hesitating, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll have to escort you." Maya followed her down the narrow aisle, feeling every step like 1,000 eyes drilling into her back. As they approached the cockpit, Maya caught sight of the flight attendants' tight, uncomfortable expressions. None of them spoke, but their silence said more than words could. They arrived at the cockpit door, and the flight attendant knocked before stepping back, giving Maya a nervous look. "He'll be with you in a moment." Maya nodded but didn't say anything. Her mind was a storm of thoughts, each one more frantic than the last. How could this be happening? How could she, a paying customer, be treated like this, so casually, so dismissively? A few moments later, the door to the cockpit opened. A middle-aged man in a captain's uniform stepped out, his face slightly flushed. He gave her a strained smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maya, right?" he said, his tone overly formal. "I'm Captain Lawrence. I understand there's been some confusion, but I assure you this will be resolved shortly." "Confusion?" Maya repeated, her voice low, barely containing the bitterness. "No, it wasn't confusion. This was about me. This was about my skin color." Captain Lawrence's smile faltered, and he shifted on his feet. Now, let's calm down." "No." Maya cut him off, her voice stronger now. "I'm done with the calm. You moved me to the back of the plane, without any reason, and that announcement you made? Don't insult me. It wasn't a mistake, it was intentional." Her voice cracked slightly, the weight of the accusation almost too much to bear. "I want to know why." The captain opened his mouth, but no words came out first. His eyes flickered nervously as he ran a hand through his graying hair. Maya could see him scrambling to come up with some explanation that wouldn't make things worse. He didn't realize it yet, but there was nothing he could say that would make things better. This wasn't just about an apology. It was about the years of microaggressions, of being told she didn't belong, of being the only one in a room full of people who didn't look like her. "I can assure you," Captain Lawrence began, his voice now soft, "there's no policy in place like that. We're just doing our best to—" "To what?" Maya interrupted again, her voice rising. "To ignore what just happened? To pretend this isn't part of a bigger issue?" The captain opened his mouth to speak, but Maya wasn't finished. "You don't get to apologize and make it go away. You don't get to send me to the back of the plane. Like, I don't belong in first class. This isn't just about me being moved. It's about you thinking you can do that to me and get away with it." A long silence stretched between them. Captain Lawrence took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the situation had finally sunk in. He didn't look at Maya now. His eyes flicked toward the flight attendant standing behind her, and then he sighed deeply, as if he were preparing for something he couldn't escape. "You're right," he said quietly. "That wasn't right. I can't explain why it happened that way, but I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again." Maya's chest tightened, her anger a tight knot she couldn't undo. "Make sure? You think you can just make it right by telling me that?" She spat, her words sharp and venomous. "This wasn't a mistake, Captain. This is the world I live in every single day. This is a racism that I face, disguised as mistakes." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "You don't get to be sorry now. You've already done the damage." The captain shifted his weight uncomfortably. "I understand that you're upset, but you're going to have to." "No, you don't understand," Maya snapped. "You don't understand anything. This isn't about your apology. This is about you making me feel small, about you assuming I'm not supposed to be in that seat. I've worked for everything I have, and you just took that from me. I'm not leaving this plane until I know what you're going to do to fix it." The captain fell silent, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The flight attendant exchanged a glance with him, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Maya wasn't finished yet, and neither was the situation. This was no longer about a seat. This was about power, about the invisible line that had been drawn the moment she stepped on board. And she wasn't going to cross it without making her voice heard. Maya stood in the narrow hallway just outside the cockpit, her hands shaking with both anger and adrenaline. She'd never imagined she'd be here, confronting the captain, demanding accountability for something so blatantly wrong. Yet here she was, and it felt like her entire life had led up to this moment. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but it was hard. Her chest was tight with the weight of everything she had just said. But it wasn't just about the seat anymore, was it? As Captain Lawrence and the flight attendant exchanged quiet words behind her, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was part of something much larger. A pattern, a history that had built up for years, long before she ever boarded this flight. Her mind wandered back to the many instances throughout her life when she had been treated as less than unseen or overlooked. She had always known, deep down, that the world wasn't fair, that there were certain barriers in place for her because of the color of her skin. But standing in that cabin, confronting a white man with power, had brought it all crashing back. The sting of being dismissed, the bitterness of seeing others given opportunities or space that she had to fight for. As a child, Maya had been a good student, often the only black girl in her class. She remembered how her teachers had overlooked her raised hand, as if she didn't have something valuable to say. She remembered how her classmates had told her she was too loud when she spoke up or too much when she asserted herself. She learned early that her voice, her ideas, her very presence were often unwelcome, even when she was in the right. In high school, she had tried to join the debate team. She practiced tirelessly, written arguments that were sharp and convincing. But the coach had told her they didn't need any more enthusiastic members. He said it with a smile, as though it was a compliment. But the message was clear. Maya wasn't the type of person the team was looking for. She'd spent hours questioning herself, wondering if she had been too confident, too ambitious, until it finally clicked. She hadn't been the problem. They had. Maya's fingers tightened around the edge of the seat in front of her as she remembered that feeling of being shut down again and again, all because she didn't fit the mold of what people expected from someone like her. That same feeling, that same familiar sting, rushed back as she stood there in the aisle. The incident on the plane wasn't new. It was just another chapter in a history she had been living every day. "Are you okay?" A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was the flight attendant who had led her to the cockpit, her face still etched with discomfort. She had been quiet for most of the confrontation, but now she seemed almost sympathetic. Maya's gaze snapped to her, and she saw the awkwardness in the woman's eyes. "I'm fine," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But no, I'm not okay. I wasn't okay the second I was moved from my seat." The flight attendant nodded, looking down at her shoes. "I know it wasn't right. I should have spoken up sooner." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to hearing those words. People usually didn't speak up. They didn't make waves. They didn't want to rock the boat. Maya was used to the silence of bystanders. She had become accustomed to it. In fact, had learned how to expect it. "But you didn't," Maya said, her voice colder now. "You watched me be moved, and you didn't say anything. You didn't stand up for me." The flight attendant flinched, and for a brief moment, Maya almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I know," the attendant said quietly, her face flushing with embarrassment. "And I regret it. I didn't know how to handle it." Maya's lips pressed together. "You should have handled it by standing up for what was right, but you didn't." The attendant opened her mouth as if to respond, but then closed it again. She looked at Maya for a long moment, as though weighing the truth of what was being said. Finally, she exhaled deeply and nodded. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. If it does, I'll do what I can to make it right." Maya nodded, though it did little to ease the bitterness in her chest. The apology was hollow, and Maya knew that. This wasn't about words anymore. It was about accountability and the lack of it. It was about seeing the problem and choosing not to address it, not because you didn't know how, but because you were afraid to. "Well," Maya said, her voice a little softer now, "it's good to know you'll do something about it. But until I see action, I'm not going to just forget this." You can't just apologize and expect me to move on. I know, the flight attendant said, her voice quiet. I won't forget this either. The captain stepped out from the cockpit, his posture a little slouched. He didn't look at either of them directly at first, his gaze shifting toward the aisle as if he were trying to decide where to look. Maya's eyes narrowed, and she straightened her back. You should know, the captain began slowly, his voice uncertain, that I've spoken with my superiors. They're aware of what happened, and they're investigating. We're going to ensure this doesn't happen again. Maya didn't trust him. His words felt rehearsed, too polished, as though he'd said them before too many times. Investigation? Is that what you call it? Maya asked, her voice hard. You think an investigation is going to make things better? The captain winced at her tone but continued. We're committed to making things right. You're not alone in this, I promise. Maya shook her head. No, I'm not alone. But you have to understand, Captain Lawrence, this isn't just about this flight. This is bigger than that. It's about all the people like me who are told they don't belong. People who are silenced, pushed aside, and dismissed by systems built on lies. I'm not looking for your promise. I'm looking for real change. The captain opened his mouth to reply, but the words didn't come. He nodded once, more to himself than to Maya. We'll do our best, he said, a whisper defeat in his voice. The flight attendant gave Maya one last look before turning away, as if she had said everything she could. Maya wasn't sure if she believed her. She wasn't sure if she could trust anyone on this plane. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. She had fought for her place, and she would continue to fight until things changed. The rest of the flight passed in a strange limbo. Maya's mind kept replaying the conversation she'd had with the captain and the flight attendant. Their words were hollow, yet there was something in their eyes, something she couldn't quite place. The captain had promised they would make things right, but promises didn't fix systemic racism. They didn't erase the deep-seated history of discrimination that had made her feel invisible, like she didn't belong in spaces where others took their privilege for granted. Maya couldn't just forget it. She couldn't let it go. She wasn't the type to remain silent. This wasn't a fleeting moment. It was a pattern she had seen over and over again. And if this wasn't the time to make a stand, then when? The plane hummed steadily through the sky, but the tension in Maya's chest never abated. She tried to tune out the sounds of the passengers around her, but the whispers continued, barely hidden in the cabin. She couldn't help overhearing their conversations, some sympathetic, others skeptical, and a few outright dismissive. One voice stood out above the rest. "Why don't you just let it go?" A passenger behind her muttered to his companion. "It's just a seat. It's not like they're treating her like a second-class citizen." Maya's spine stiffened, and before she could stop herself, she turned around and locked eyes with the man. He immediately shrank back, but she wasn't going to let him off that easily. She had to say something. "You don't get it, do you?" Maya's voice was steady but sharp. "It's not about the seat. It's about how people like me are treated in spaces that weren't made for us. You don't have to think about it, because it doesn't affect you, but it affects me every damn day." The man stared at her, wide-eyed. His companion, a woman who'd been quietly watching the exchange, shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean—" The man started, but Maya cut him off. "No, you didn't mean to, and that's exactly the problem." She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "You never have to mean it, because you don't see it. You don't even recognize it when it happens. But it happens, all the time." There was a pause, thick with tension. Maya could feel the weight of every passenger in the cabin as they quietly observed the confrontation. It was uncomfortable for them, but it was necessary for Maya. She needed them to hear her. She needed them to understand that the everyday injustices she faced were not just small inconveniences. They were the very fabric of the system that kept her and others like her from truly belonging. The man's face softened. He didn't speak, but for the first time, his expression held something closer to remorse than dismissal. Maya turned back around in her seat, her heart still pounding, but she was relieved. She had spoken her truth, and even though it hadn't been easy, it felt like a small victory. Minutes later, the captain's voice returned over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've landed in New York. Please remain seated while we prepare for deplaning, he said, his voice warm but strained. Maya could feel the tension in the air as the plane began its descent. This wasn't just another flight. It was a moment in her life that had shifted everything. She had made her stand. Now, it was time to face the consequences. She wasn't sure what those would be, but she knew she had done what she needed to do. The truth had been spoken. As the plane touched down, the captain's earlier words echoed in Maya's mind. He had promised they would fix things. But promises, she had learned over the years, didn't always lead to action. Maya wasn't waiting for things to be fixed. She was done waiting for the system to change on its own. It was time for her to take charge. The passengers began to rise, gathering their belongings, the noise of the cabin returning to its usual hustle. But Maya stayed seated. She wasn't in any rush. This moment, this confrontation, was something she wanted to savor. She wanted to leave on her own terms, not as someone who had been quietly humiliated and left to swallow her pride. As the rest of the plane emptied, the flight attendants came to her. One of them, the same one who had escorted her to the cockpit, stopped in front of her. "I just wanted to say thank you for speaking up," she said, her voice small but sincere. Maya met her eyes. "It's the least I could do," she replied. "But I'm not done yet, not by a long shot." The attendant nodded, and for a moment, it seemed as though the weight of Maya's words had landed. She wasn't the only one who had been silently watching. As Maya gathered her things and prepared to exit the plane, she noticed a captain standing by the door. His eyes met hers as she approached, but she didn't stop. She didn't need another apology. She didn't need his promise to do better. What she needed was action, and she would make sure it came. As she stepped off the plane, a sense of quiet determination settled over her. This was only the beginning. The real fight was just getting started. The terminal was bustling with the usual sounds of passengers shuffling in and out, retrieving luggage, and making their way through security. But for Maya, the noise felt distant, muffled. She had just landed in New York, but it felt like the entire weight of the flight, the confrontation, and the chaos that had unfolded was still hanging over her. It wasn't just the physical fatigue she was feeling. It was the emotional exhaustion, the emotional toll of having to explain herself again and again, of having to bear the burden of being the angry black woman. Whenever she spoke out against injustice, as she walked to the terminal, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, hesitating for a moment before unlocking the screen. It was a news alert. Airline under fire for racially discriminatory incident during flight. Passenger calls out mistreatment on social media. Her heart dropped into her stomach. The world was starting to notice. Maya knew this would happen. It was exactly why she had spoken up. But seeing it in print, seeing the incident splash across her phone screen, made it feel so much more real. It was no longer just a moment on a plane. It was a story that was going to be dissected, scrutinized, and picked apart by people who would never truly understand what it was like to be in her shoes. She clicked the link, scrolling through the article. It was already picking up steam, trending on social media. There were quotes from witnesses, from a flight crew, even from some passengers who had offered their support. But there were also those who dismissed the incident, calling it an overreaction or claiming that Maya was simply looking for trouble. The division was palpable. Maya's fingers hovered over the screen, her emotions teetering between pride and frustration. She had opened the door, and there was no closing it now. The story was out there, and she was going to be at the center of it. But she also knew something else. She had to keep pushing. She had to make sure that her experience wasn't just some isolated incident. She had to make sure that people saw the broader implications of what happened, that it wasn't just one flight, one captain, or one flight attendant. It was a system, a pattern, that permeated society. And Maya had no intention of letting it be swept under the rug. She stepped outside, the cool New York air hitting her like a wave. She took a deep breath, letting the coldness fill her lungs and steady her nerves. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from her best friend, Tasha. "Girl, I saw what happened on that plane. You're a legend. Keep fighting." Maya smiled for the first time that day. Tasha always knew how to lift her spirits. But as she tapped out a quick reply, Maya's thoughts kept returning to the flight crew, those who had witnessed everything unfold but hadn't stepped in. Her mind was still on that flight attendant, the one who had escorted her to the cockpit, the one who had apologized but then had said she would make sure this didn't happen again. Was that enough? Was it enough for her to just offer a half-hearted apology, to say she was sorry and move on? Maya wasn't so sure. The flight attendant's words lingered in her mind. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. But Maya knew that these kind of things didn't just stop. They didn't just go away because someone said they were sorry. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a system that saw people like her as second-class citizens. It was a system that didn't just mistreat her. It took away her dignity, her sense of belonging. Maya sat down on one of the nearby benches, trying to collect her thoughts. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was an alert from her social media. The hashtag Seat for Maya was trending. Maya's stomach tightened as she scrolled through the posts. Some were supportive, calling her brave. Others were condemning the airline and the flight crew for allowing such blatant racism. But one comment, one post, caught her attention. It was a video of a passenger who had been on the flight. Standing up for Maya, the woman, a middle-aged white woman with short blonde hair, was speaking to camera, her voice steady but full of conviction. I was on that flight, the woman said, and what I saw was wrong. Maya was treated unfairly, and it wasn't just a mistake. I saw the look in the flight attendant's eyes when she walked past, saw how uncomfortable she was. The whole crew was complicit in letting it happen, and I won't stand for it. Maya's heart swelled with gratitude, and for the first time since the flight, she felt a spark of hope. There were people who were listening. There were people who saw what she saw, who understood that this wasn't just about one flight. It was about the ongoing, everyday fight against racism. As the video gained traction, the conversation started to shift. The airline's public relations team scrambled to control the narrative, but it was too late. Maya had already taken control. The support was pouring in, and the backlash against the airline was swift and strong. By the time Maya returned to her hotel room, her phone was buzzing nonstop with messages. Some were from people she knew, others from strangers offering their support. It was overwhelming, but it felt good, better than she expected. This was a fight, but it was a fight worth having. As she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the glowing screen, Maya thought about the flight crew again. She thought about the captain's awkward apologies and the flight attendant's uncomfortable words. Were they genuinely remorseful, or were they just afraid of the fallout? The answer didn't matter to Maya. What mattered was that she had started a conversation. She had made people uncomfortable, and that discomfort was the first step toward change. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Tasha. "Girl, you're going to make a difference," Tasha said when Maya answered, her voice excited. "This is just the beginning." Maya smiled, her heart heavy but full of determination. "I know, and I'm not stopping here. Not now, not ever." By morning, Maya's name was everywhere. She woke to the sharp buzz of her phone, vibrating nonstop on the nightstand. Notifications stacked on notifications, missed calls, DMs, emails from unknown addresses. Her chest tightened before she even unlocked the screen. This was the part no one prepared you for. Speaking up was one thing. Being seen was another. She scrolled. Clips from a plane. Passenger footage. Threads breaking down the incident frame by frame. Headlines arguing with each other in bold fonts. Passenger claims racial bias on domestic flight. Airline denies discrimination, promises internal review. Was this really racism or a seating mix-up? Maya let the phone drop onto the bed beside her and stared at the ceiling. The hotel room was quiet, sterile. Beige walls, white sheets, the hum of traffic outside the window. The stillness felt unreal compared to the noise online. Her phone rang. "Tasha again. Do not read the comments," Tasha said immediately, voice firm. "Promise me." Maya gave a tired half-laugh. "Too late." "Of course it is." Tasha sighed. "But listen to me. You did the right thing. Don't let them twist it." "They already are," Maya said softly. "They're calling me dramatic, entitled, angry." "Of course they are," Tasha snapped. Because if they admit you're right, they have to admit the system is broken. A knock sounded at the door. Maya froze. You expecting anyone? Tasha asked. No. Maya hung up and approached the door slowly, peering through the peephole. A hotel staff member stood outside with an envelope. She cracked the door open. Ms. Carter? The woman asked politely. This was left for you at the front desk. Inside the envelope was a business card and a short handwritten note. We represent the airline. We'd like to speak with you today. Privately. Maya exhaled through her nose. Of course they did. An hour later, she sat across from two people in crisp suits in a quiet conference room off the hotel lobby. A man with a tight smile, a woman with a tablet, and carefully neutral eyes. We want to start by saying we regret your experience. The man said smoothly. That is not who we are as a company. Maya leaned back in her chair. Then why did it happen? The woman cleared her throat. We're still gathering facts. You already have them, Maya said. I was removed from my seat, without cause, in front of everyone. The man nodded. And we're prepared to offer compensation. There it is, Maya said quietly. The room shifted. This isn't about money, she continued. It never was. It's about accountability, about policy, about why your staff felt comfortable assuming I didn't belong. The woman tapped her tablet. We can discuss next steps internally. That's not good enough, Maya said. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight now. Internal reviews don't protect the next person. Public accountability does. The man's smile tightened further. You should be careful. Public accusations can have consequences. Maya met his gaze without blinking. So does silence. They ended the meeting shortly after that. By afternoon, the airline released a statement. Carefully worded, vague, non-committal. Maya read it once, then posted her own response. She didn't shout. She didn't rant. She told the truth. She described the moment she was asked to move, the way no one explained why, the silence, the announcement, the humiliation. She named the pattern without naming individuals. She ended with one sentence. I don't want an apology. I want change. The post exploded. Support poured in. So, did hate. Strangers dissected her tone, her past, her right to be upset. Some demanded proof. Others shared their own stories. Airports, hotels, offices, classrooms. Different places. Same script. That night, a producer from a national news network called. We'd like you to come on tomorrow, the woman said. Tell your story. Maya hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone. Why? She asked. Because people are listening, the producer said. And because what happened to you happens every day. Maya looked out the hotel window at the city lights below. Endless. Restless. Watching. Okay, she said finally. But I'm not here to be palatable. The producer smiled through the phone. Good. Neither are we. As Maya hung up, the weight settled in her chest. Not fear this time, but something heavier. Responsibility. She knew what came next wouldn't be easy. She would be questioned, doubted, reduced to a headline. She would lose pieces of her privacy, her peace, but she would also be heard. And somewhere, someone watching would recognize themselves in her story and realize they weren't crazy. They weren't imagining it. They weren't alone. Maya turned off her phone and sat in the quiet. Tomorrow, everything would change. The studio lights were bright, almost blinding. Maya squinted as the crew bustled around, preparing for her segment. The makeup artist patted powder onto her skin, trying to smooth out the tension that was still visible in the lines of her face. But nothing could disguise what had happened. Nothing could hide the way her heart raced beneath her calm exterior. She had barely slept the night before, her thoughts tangled in a storm of uncertainty. The decision to go public, to let the world see the ugliness of what had been done to her, felt like both a victory and a loss. A victory because she was finally taking control, but a loss because the fight was far from over. The news network had done their research. They had combed through the incident, interviewed witnesses, and even talked to some of the passengers who had supported her. They had set the stage for her to speak truth to power, to make the airline feel the weight of her words. But it wasn't just the airline that would feel the pressure. It was the system. It was a silence that so many people had been complicit in. And now, Maya was forcing everyone to confront it. She sat in the plush chair, trying to steady her breathing. The interviewer, a calm, well-dressed woman, smiled at her from across the desk. "Ms. Carter," the interviewer began, "thank you for joining us today. Your story has sparked a national conversation about racial bias and discrimination. Many have called you a hero for speaking out. How are you feeling about all the attention?" Maya met the interviewer's gaze, her lips pressing together for a moment. She had practiced this moment in her head, had prepared herself for the questions, for the judgment. But now that it was real, she couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. "I'm not a hero," Maya replied, her voice steady but firm. "I'm just a person who was treated unfairly, who was denied something that I earned, something I was entitled to. What I want people to understand is that this wasn't about me being moved from a seat. It was about the system that allowed this to happen. The system that makes people like me feel like we don't belong in certain spaces." The interviewer nodded thoughtfully. "And what would you say to those who still don't believe you? Who think you were exaggerating or misinterpreting the situation?" Maya paused. The question stung, but she had anticipated it. There would always be people who refused to see the truth. People who didn't want to acknowledge that racism, discrimination, and bias were real, that they were embedded into the very systems that governed their lives. "I would say," Maya began, her voice low but carrying the weight of everything she had experienced, "that their disbelief doesn't change the truth. I'm not here to convince people who don't want to be convinced. I'm here to speak to those who have felt what I felt, the ones who know, deep down, that this isn't just about a single incident. This is about years of being made to feel less than, of being pushed aside, overlooked, and silenced." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving the interviewers. "It's not just my fight. It's everyone's fight. And the only way to fix it is to face it." The interviewer's expression softened. "It's clear that this moment has had a profound impact on you. But have you felt supported during this process? From the public? From your community?" Maya's lips parted for a moment as she considered the question. There had been so much support, messages, letters, social media posts from strangers, from people she had never met, telling her they saw her, that they stood with her. It was overwhelming at times, but in the best way. It reminded her that she wasn't alone, that her voice mattered. But there had also been the trolls, the people who wanted to silence her, who mocked her, who minimized what she had experienced. The hateful comments, the dismissive remarks, the people who tried to tear her down for speaking up. "It's been a roller coaster," Maya said honestly. "The support has been incredible. I've received messages from people all over the country, people who share their own stories, people who've been through similar things. But there's also been backlash. There are always people who want to invalidate your experience. They'll tell you you're wrong, that it's not a big deal, that you're making it up. But I've learned to focus on the people who get it, the ones who've been through it." The interviewer nodded again, her expression one of quiet admiration. "And what's next for you? After everything that's happened, where do you go from here?" Maya's shoulders sagged slightly as she thought about the future. What was next? What would her life look like after this? She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let this moment be a blip in the story of her life. It wasn't going to be just another headline, another news cycle that faded into the background. "I'm not done yet," Maya said, a quiet fire in her voice. "This has only been the beginning. I'm going to keep fighting for myself, for my community, for the people who don't have a voice. I've been given a platform, and I'm going to use it." The interviewer smiled. "It sounds like you've already started." Maya nodded. She had started, and she wasn't going to stop. Not until things changed. As the interview concluded, Maya walked off the stage, her mind still buzzing with everything that had happened. The press, the support, the negativity. It was all a lot to carry, but it was also a sign that things were shifting, that the conversation was growing, and that people were starting to listen. The next day, the airline issued an official apology, though it was clear they were trying to save face. The captain who had moved her, along with the flight attendant, were placed on administrative leave while an independent investigation was launched. It wasn't enough, Maya knew that, but it was a step in the right direction. At least there was action. But the real change wouldn't come from the airline. It would come from people like her. People who refused to stay silent. People who saw the system for what it was and didn't accept it. Maya had made her stand, and now the world was watching. She wasn't just a passenger on that plane anymore. She was leading the fight for change. Days after her interview aired, Maya's world had changed in ways she hadn't fully grasped. The story was everywhere. It wasn't just on the news anymore. It was in blogs, online forums, and even whispered conversations in cafes and offices across the country. People who had never given much thought to racial discrimination were suddenly grappling with the reality that Maya's story was not an isolated incident. It was a mirror to the biases and injustices that were baked into the systems that governed everyday life. But despite the growing conversation, Maya was still processing the whirlwind of it all. The phone calls, the messages, the interviews. It was exhausting. She had become a symbol of resistance, a face of the fight against racism. But when it came to constant pressure to be the perfect spokesperson, the unwavering voice of change. One morning, as she scrolled through her social media, she found a post that stopped her dead in her tracks. It was from one of her childhood friends, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. The message was simple, a reminder of their shared history. Maya, remember when we were kids and we used to talk about how we could change the world? Maybe we were onto something. It made her pause. She'd forgotten about those late-night conversations, the dreams they had shared as teenagers about the kind of world they want to create, a world where people like her didn't have to fight for basic respect. Maya had lost that idealism for a while, worn down by the realities of life, by the subtle microaggressions, and by the overt racism that followed her wherever she went. But now it felt like maybe, just maybe, they were onto something. Maybe this wasn't just a fight for her. Maybe this could be the spark for something much bigger. The next day, Maya received another call, this time from a lawyer representing several other passengers who had experienced similar treatment on flights with the same airline. They wanted to discuss class action litigation, aiming to hold the airline accountable for systemic discrimination within their policies and staff training. Maya felt the weight of the decision bearing down on her. She had already given everything to this fight. She had put herself on the line, shared her personal story with the world, and exposed herself to public scrutiny. But was this what it would take to ensure the change was real? To make sure that no one else had to endure what she had? She sat at the kitchen table, the legal documents spread out in front of her, and took a long breath. It wasn't about her anymore. She had already lived through the humiliation, the anger, and the pain. But there were others. There were countless others who had been subjected to the same kind of treatment, often without the platform to speak out. If she didn't take this step, who would? She picked up the phone and dialed the number. "I'm in," she said simply when the lawyer answered. "Let's do this." The legal case gained traction quickly. More passengers came forward with stories of discriminatory practices they had faced on flights, all under the same airline. The lawsuit expanded to include not only racial bias, but also the broader issues of lack of proper training for staff on how to handle racial situations and the company's failure to acknowledge the systemic nature of the problem. But the media coverage wasn't as one-sided as Maya had hoped. The airline fought back, hiring a PR firm to paint their actions in a more favorable light. They made vague promises about reviewing procedures and improving staff training. Some news outlets reported these as victories for the airline, framing it as though they were taking accountability, without addressing the root of the issue. The company had built its practices on a foundation of racial bias, and those in positions of power were not willing to confront that truth. As Maya prepared for the next phase of the case, she couldn't help but notice the familiar pattern of resistance. The same silence that she had encountered in the cabin. Those who stood by, unwilling to speak up, was now in full view. People who should have supported the cause, who should have rallied behind the victims, were instead finding ways to minimize the issue. The ripple effect she had set in motion was growing, but so was the pushback. It came in the form of social media posts, news stories designed to frame her as the angry black woman. It came from people who refused to acknowledge their privilege, who criticized her for demanding justice. They said she was making things worse, that she should have accepted the apology and moved on. But Maya wasn't interested in easy solutions. She was tired of being told to calm down, to just let it go. She had let so much go in her life, her dignity, her rights, her sense of self-worth. She had been silent for too long, and now that she had a voice, she would not let anyone silence her again. Not the airline, not the trolls, not anyone. One evening, as she sat in her apartment, going through documents related to the case, her phone buzzed with a new notification. She glanced down and saw the headline. Maya Carter's case against airline gains national attention. Sparks calls for change in aviation industry. Maya stared at the screen, feeling a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. She had been right. The fight wasn't just about her. It was about the system. The airline was just one piece of the puzzle, and now the conversation was shifting. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She had stepped into the fight, not to win one battle, but to change the system. The cost would be high. The road ahead would be long and full of obstacles. But Maya wasn't afraid anymore. She had found her voice, and she would continue to use it, no matter what. The day of the court hearing arrived with the kind of weight Maya had come to expect. The world outside seemed to move at its usual pace. People rushing through their daily routines, oblivious of the battle being fought in the courtroom just a few blocks away. But for Maya, it was a pivotal moment, a turning point. She had been through so much since that fateful flight, so much more than she had ever imagined when she first spoke out. The morning air was crisp as she stood in front of the courthouse, the wind rustling her coat and hair. She could feel the weight of every step, every breath, as she approached the doors. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the culmination of everything she had fought for. It was for the countless others who had been mistreated, dismissed, and overlooked. The airline had hired a team of high-powered lawyers, and she knew they would fight tooth and nail to protect their brand. They had done everything they could to turn the conversation in their favor, from vague promises of policy change to media spin that painted them as the victim of a smear campaign. But Maya was resolute. She had no intention of backing down now. As she walked through the entrance, her eyes scanned the room. There were news crews lining the walls, cameras set up in every corner, and reporters whispering among themselves. This wasn't just a case about a seat on a plane anymore. It was a case about power, about who had the ability to take up space, to speak, to demand what was rightfully theirs. Maya took a deep breath and made her way toward the courtroom. She could feel the eyes on her, the whispers, but she stood tall. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the person who would make them listen. Inside the courtroom, her lawyer briefed her one last time, going over the points they would argue, the evidence they would present. But Maya wasn't focused on the details of the case anymore. She had already made her stand. She had already spoken her truth. This moment, this battle, wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about sending a message to everyone who had been made to feel less than, who had been pushed aside, who had been told they didn't belong. The doors opened, and the judge entered. The room fell silent as she took her seat. The proceedings began, and the tension in the air was palpable. But Maya remained calm. She had prepared for this. She had prepared for everything. When it was her turn to speak, she stood up, walked to the witness stand, and faced the room. She felt the weight of every eye on her, but she didn't flinch. She was ready. "I was moved from my seat without explanation," Maya began, her voice clear and steady. "I was made to feel as though I didn't belong in a space that I had earned. I'm here today not just for myself, but for everyone who has experienced the same thing, for everyone who has been told that they don't matter, that they don't belong, that they're not welcome." She paused, looking around the room, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Racism doesn't always look like hate speech or overt violence," she continued. "Sometimes it looks like a seat being taken from you. It looks like the silence of people who watch and do nothing. It looks like the silence of those in power who refuse to see the harm they're causing. This case is bigger than me. It's bigger than this airline. It's about a system that tells people like me that we're less than. And I'm here to say, no more. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke the last words, but her resolve never wavered. This was her truth, and nothing could take that from her. As she returned to her seat, she could feel the weight of her words settle in the room. The jury watched her closely, and for a moment, Maya could see that they were no longer just hearing her. They were understanding her. This wasn't about one flight, one mistake, or one apology. This was about the bigger picture, the system that needed to change, the world that needed to change. The proceedings continued, but Maya knew, deep down, that she had done what she needed to do. No matter the outcome of the trial, her voice had already made a difference. The ripple effect she had started had already begun to spread. More passengers had come forward with their stories. More people were talking about the realities of racism in everyday life. And, most importantly, people were listening. Hours later, the hearing adjourned, and Maya stepped out of courtroom. The press was there, waiting, but she didn't look at them. She wasn't interested in the headlines. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. She had already given everything she could to this cause. She had spoken her truth, and now it was up to the world to decide whether it was ready to change. As she made her way to the exit, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find another message from Tasha. "You did it. No matter what happens, you did it." Maya smiled, her heart heavy but full. She had done it, and she was proud. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning.